I need to tell you about a hollowed board inside an 18th century Geneva Bible, a board my son swore was worthless and tossed into a trash bag, a board that held the original notarized agreement proving I owned half of a rare book conservation studio he tried to steal. My late husband had written a warning on the last page of that Bible, 5 words in ink that bled through the paper like a bruise. Do not trust Daniel. Save yourself. I read those words after my son handed me a $4,600 colophon check for a $740,000 first-folio sale. And I read them again before I voided that sale and watched him led out of a bank in handcuffs. By the end, he was sewing book signatures in a canvas apron that said stitched in lies inside my shop, binding of deceit rare books, and every restoration certificate that left my counter printed his fraud docket number. That is where this goes. Here is how it unfolded. My name is Ellen Voss. I am 57 years old, and for 32 years I worked night shifts as a registered nurse in a rural hospital, 12 hours at a stretch, listening to ventilator alarms and reading cardiac rhythms like they were weather reports. I started in the ICU, then moved to the emergency department, then spent my last decade as a charge nurse on the medical surgical floor, which means I have seen every way a family can turn on itself when money and grief collide. I drained $128,000 from my nursing pension to open an antiquarian book and paper conservation studio with my son Daniel, notarized his 50% stake, and promised our church's Sunday school a lifetime of free Bible repairs, small stitches on split spines and tears on title pages, because that was my way of tithing from the skills Paul, and I had collected over 40 years of marriage. I have a set of dental picks, a bone folder, and a small brass weight I use to hold pages open while glue dries. I can reattach a detached board, wash a foxed page with calcium hypochlorite, and rebuild a cracked leather spine with Japanese tissue and wheat starch paste. I can also read a financial statement faster than a lab report. My late husband Paul was the quiet architect of our family, a man who measured twice and cut once, and he kept his warnings folded like church bulletins. He was the one who taught me that a good glue joint is stronger than the wood around it, and that a locked drawer is only as honest as the key you leave in it. I grew up in my father's locksmith shop, which meant I could feel the difference between a loose pin and a binding pin in a keyway before I ever learned to read a policy number. I keep a small leather roll of picks in my sewing kit and a bone folder in my purse, and I have a habit of charting everything, a nurse's tick that later became a weapon. Those details matter. Paul died on a Tuesday in March, an aortic dissection while he was changing the oil in his pickup. He was 61, healthy, and gone before the ambulance reached the driveway. I found him half under the truck, still holding a socket wrench, the oil pan drained and the filter unscrewed, like he had simply stopped mid-task. The medical examiner said it was quick. I have seen enough death to know quick is a mercy, but it did not feel like mercy that morning. By Wednesday morning, before I had even picked out his burial suit, Daniel and his wife Marlena were at my front door with a casserole, a leather portfolio, and a list of things I needed to sign. Marlena wore a cream silk blouse and a perfume that smelled like cold citrus, and she kept touching my shoulder as if I were a fragile piece of china. Daniel used his church voice, soft and liquid, saying, "Mom, we are here to manage everything." I should have known then that manage was a verb with teeth. Daniel was Paul's golden child, the boy who could do no wrong, the one Paul had taught to fish and who had cried at his father's wake while checking stock alerts on his phone. Marlena was the slick image-obsessed spouse, a former real estate stager who thought grief should be color-coordinated. She had already started calling the funeral home to ask about casket colors and whether the viewing room could be staged with white lilies and a neutral throw on the guest sofa. Within that first day, they had started clearing Paul's workshop, labeling boxes with sticky notes that said donate, trash, estate sale. I stood in the doorway of the garage, still wearing Paul's flannel shirt over my nightgown, and I watched Daniel pull a stack of old theology books off a shelf and drop them into a black trash bag. At the bottom of that stack was a small brown book with cracked calf leather, brass corner pieces, and a broken clasp, an 18th century Geneva Bible with a heavy wooden board. Daniel held it up, wrinkled his nose, and said, "This thing is worthless. The spine is shot. No collector wants a cheap Bible." He tossed it into the donate box, then changed his mind and tossed it into the trash bag because the box was full. I waited until he left the garage to take a phone call. Then I reached into the trash bag and pulled the Bible out. It was heavier than it looked, and when I tapped the backboard, there was a dull knock, not the solid thunk of old wood. The cover felt different, like a false floor in a drawer. I slid it under my cardigan and took it to my bedroom, wedging it behind the mattress where Daniel and Marlena would not look. That night, after Daniel and Marlena had gone back to their rental house, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the Bible. The leather was dry and flaking, and the pages smelled like old paper, a smell I knew from the conservation studio, a mix of vanilla and dust and time. The binding was broken in several places, and someone had used old masking tape to hold the frontboard to the text block, a conservator's nightmare. On the last blank page, in Paul's handwriting, the same blue ink he used in his work ledger, were 5 words. "Do not trust Daniel. Save yourself." Underneath, in smaller letters, he had written, "The board is false. The truth is inside." I sat there with my heart beating in my throat. My husband had known. He had left me a warning hidden in a book that Daniel would dismiss as junk, and he had done it because he knew exactly what his son would become. I did not open the false board that night. I needed proper conservation tools, a micro spatula and a thin lifting knife, and I needed to be alone and sure that no one would walk in. I also needed to wait because Daniel and Marlena were coming back in the morning, and I had to be the foggy widow they expected. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family should mean trust, not transactions. Daniel and Marlena moved fast. They told me I was fragile, that Paul's death had left me foggy, that I needed help with finances and legal matters. They printed a durable power of attorney and a conservatorship petition, and they set them on my kitchen table next to a cup of tea Marlena had made. The tea was chamomile, but it was cold by the time she handed it to me, and she had put it in a cup with a chip in the rim, the same cup Paul used for his morning coffee. Daniel's voice was syrupy. "Mom, we just want to take care of you. Sign here and we will handle the studio, the house, the retirement accounts, all of it. You do not need to worry about a thing." Marlena added, "You have been through so much, Ellen. Let us carry it." I looked at the papers and let my hands tremble. I told them I had not slept, that my mind felt like a radio station with static, that I could not remember where I put my reading glasses. I told them maybe tomorrow, after I could think. I made my voice thin and far away. I did not sign anything. I never planned to sign anything, but I needed them to believe I was too broken to fight. Over the next several days, they brought more documents. A quitclaim deed on the house, a transfer of the studio's operating account, a medical release authorizing Daniel to speak with my doctors, a living trust amendment that would remove me as trustee and name Daniel as sole successor. Each time, I asked for a magnifying glass, squinted at the page, and then said I had a headache and needed to lie down. I stalled and stalled. I had charted medication dosages for crashing patients in the middle of code blues, and I could read a balance sheet faster than a lab report. But they saw only a gray-haired woman in a cardigan, so I gave them that woman. I kept a small voice recorder in my cardigan pocket, the same kind I had used to document patient handoffs, and I pressed record every time they came into the room with papers. I also kept a tiny spiral notebook in the waistband of my skirt, where I wrote shorthand notes like a nurse's chart. Date, time, document, threat. The notebook stayed hidden under the elastic of my support hose, the last place they would look. Within a week, they had packed up my bedroom and moved me into their spare room, a beige guest suite with a locked thermostat and a baby monitor on the nightstand. They said it was for my safety. I knew it was to control my movements. They took my car keys, saying I should not drive while I was grieving, and they redirected my mail to their address, saying I needed to rest. They told the church I needed a season of quiet, and they told my neighbors I was confused and disoriented. I let them. I played the part of a confused widow who needed her golden boy. I let Marlena pick out my clothes, and Daniel explain my finances to me in slow, patient sentences. I watched them install a lock on the thermostat and set it to 68 degrees, and I watched them hide the only spare key. I slept in a bed with sheets that smelled like lavender fabric softener, and I woke every morning at 5 a.m., from years of night shift habit, staring at the ceiling and making mental lists. I was a prisoner in a comfortable room, but I had 2 things they did not know about. The original agreement hidden in the Geneva Bible, which I had smuggled out of my house under my coat, and a brain that had spent 32 years learning to read people in their worst moments. At their house, I began to notice things. Daniel took phone calls at odd hours, stepping into the garage and lowering his voice. I heard words like wire transfer, escrow hold, and verification of assets. He would come back inside with a tight smile and say, "Just work, Mom. Nothing for you to worry about." Marlena ordered a $6,000 crystal chandelier for the dining room, and a leased Lexus SUV appeared in the driveway. Daniel started wearing a Patek Philippe watch, or a very good counterfeit, and he scheduled a consultation with an architect about remodeling the kitchen. They hosted a small dinner party for a man Daniel introduced as his investment advisor, and I overheard Marlena telling a guest, "The old lady won't know until it's all settled." I was in the hallway, pretending to look for the bathroom, and I stood very still, memorizing the exact words. They were spending money as if the $740,000 university sale had already cleared. That told me the sale was real, and it was moving. I started noticing other things too. Daniel's mail included statements from a bank I did not recognize, with a post office box in a town 2 counties over. Marlena had a storage unit bill for a facility near the airport, and when I asked about it, she said it was for her seasonal decor. I noticed she drove a different route to the grocery store every time, and she always locked her purse in the trunk before coming inside. I noticed Daniel shredded documents every night around 9, the cross-cut shredder in his office making a grinding sound like a patient's teeth under sedation. I noticed he never used the landline, only his cell, and he always stood near the window facing the street when he talked. I was not just a nurse. I was a trained observer. I had spent years watching for the subtle signs of a patient's decline, and I applied that same skill to my son's decline into something far worse. One morning, Marlena was trying to open a locked filing cabinet in the hallway closet. She had lost the key, and Daniel was useless, punching the top of the cabinet as if force could replace a tumbler. She was complaining loudly about needing a locksmith, and she said she had already called 2 companies but neither could come until the next day. I was standing in the hallway, holding a cup of lukewarm tea, wearing a cardigan and slippers, playing my part. I said, "Let me look, I used to help my father in his shop." She rolled her eyes and said, "Ellen, you're not a locksmith." I said no, but my father was, and he taught me a few things. She stepped back, and I knelt down in front of the cabinet. It was a cheap 4-wafer cabinet lock, the kind you can buy at a big box store for $20. I reached into my sewing kit, which I kept in my cardigan pocket, and pulled out a small leather roll of picks. I selected a shallow hook and a feather-light tension wrench. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway and applied the barest clockwise pressure, just enough to bind the first wafer. Then I raked the hook across the wafers 4 or 5 times, feeling the slight give as each one set. The lock turned inside 8 seconds. I stood up and opened the cabinet door. Daniel stared. "Mom, where did you learn that?" I shrugged and said, "Your grandfather was a locksmith. You never asked." That was the first time I saw fear flicker across his face. He realized I was not entirely the foggy old woman I had been performing. I made a note of that. The next time I picked a lock, I would not let him watch. That night, I waited until they were asleep. I had been timing their routines for a week, and I knew Daniel usually fell asleep around 11 after a bourbon and a Netflix documentary, and Marlena fell asleep around 10:30 after her nightly skincare routine. I took the same lock picks, a small LED flashlight, and a pair of white cotton book handling gloves, and I went to Daniel's office, a converted 3rd bedroom with a keypad lock. The keypad was cheap, and Daniel had used his birthday, 0814, because he is not as clever as he thinks. I punched the code, and the latch gave with a soft snick. Inside, the office smelled like burnt coffee and paper. I found a cross-cut shredder overflowing with documents, a filing cabinet with a broken lock, and a laptop left open on the desk. The laptop screen glowed with a spreadsheet showing account balances, and I paused to read it. There was a line for the studio operating account, negative $12,000. A line for a credit card in my name, unknown to me, with a balance of $47,000. A line for a loan from a private lender, $200,000, with a payment due in 3 weeks. I took a photo of the screen with my phone, using a macro lens attachment I had from my book conservation work, making sure the screen was in focus. Then I turned to the filing cabinet. I started with the filing cabinet. I used my small LED flashlight and my nursing habit of systematic triage. I sorted papers into piles by type, handling each sheet by the edges, never touching the centers where fingerprints might smear. I found a forged partnership dissolution dated 6 weeks after Paul's funeral, with my signature on it, except the E and Ellen slanted the wrong way, and the notary stamp was from a county office that had no record of the notary. I found a bill of sale to the Wakefield University Rare Book Library for the restored first-folio collection, 7 pieces, for $740,000. The bill of sale listed the seller as Voss Restoration Trust, with Daniel and Marlena as trustees, and it included a clause that the sale could not be canceled once the wire transfer was initiated. I found wiring instructions to an escrow account at a bank in Nevis, under the name Voss Restoration Trust, with a routing number that did not match any domestic bank in the Federal Register. And I found a loan agreement, a predatory commercial loan for $200,000 against the studio's inventory, with my name listed as personal guarantor. I had never signed that loan. My signature was on it, but the stroke pressure was all wrong, too smooth, no tremor, no hesitation, the kind of signature a forger copies from a scanned document. I recognized the notary name on the loan agreement, a woman named Tammy Lister, who had a small office in the next town. I remembered seeing a local news story about her commission being suspended for improper notarization 6 months earlier. I filed that away. In the shredder basket, I found strips of paper that reassembled into a letter from a rare book dealer, offering to authenticate the folios for a fee, and a bank statement showing Daniel had paid himself a consulting fee of $90,000 from the studio's operating account 3 days after Paul died. The shredder had not pulverized the strips, because it was a cheap cross-cut unit that left strips wide enough to reassemble. I laid the strips out on a piece of glass from a picture frame I found in the office, shining my flashlight through them to align the cuts like a jigsaw puzzle. The letter from the rare book dealer was dated 2 weeks before Paul died, and it referenced a conversation about liquidating the collection quickly, before certain parties could object. I photographed the reassembled strips from directly above, using the macro lens and a small ruler I had in my sewing kit for scale. I photographed everything: the forged dissolution, the bill of sale, the loan agreement, the bank statement, the letter. I did not steal the originals yet. I needed them to think I was still blind. I did steal one thing, a sticky note with a passcode to Daniel's laptop, which he had taped under the desk drawer, because he is the kind of man who writes down passwords. The passcode was written in blue ink, in Daniel's handwriting, and it read, Voss 2024, exactly as I expected. I did not open the laptop that night. I needed to be careful about login times and digital footprints, and I knew the laptop might have location tracking or a keylogger. But I photographed the sticky note and memorized the password. Then I went back to my bedroom and retrieved the Geneva Bible from behind the mattress. I laid a piece of acid-free blotter paper on the dresser and set the book on top. I put on a pair of nitrile gloves, the same kind I used for handling old paper, and I selected a thin micro spatula from my conservation kit. The backboard of the Bible was made of oak, covered in calf leather, and I could see a faint seam where the pastidown had been lifted before. I slid the micro spatula under the pastidown, that paper lining on the inside of the backboard, starting at the top corner where the adhesive had already loosened. The adhesive was old hide glue, brittle, and it lifted with a soft crackle. I worked slowly, a millimeter at a time, using a bone folder to hold the lifted edge while the spatula advanced toward the center. It took 11 minutes to free the pastidown without tearing it, because old paper is fragile, and I was not about to damage a 250-year-old Bible, even for the truth. Under the pastidown was a hollowed cavity, cut into the board, about the size of a postcard and maybe a 1/4 inch deep. Inside was a folded piece of cotton paper, acid-free and warm to the touch, and a small USB drive. I unfolded the paper. It was the original notarized partnership agreement between me and Daniel, dated 9 years earlier, signed by both of us in front of a notary named Catherine Bell, with a raised seal I could feel under my thumb. It listed my 50% stake in the studio, the lifetime free Bible repairs for the church, and a clause that any dissolution of the partnership required both partners to appear in person before a notary and provide a signed consent form with a specific witness. The forged dissolution Daniel had filed had none of those safeguards. I put the paper flat on my dresser and looked at the USB drive. It was Paul's handwriting on the label. For Ellen. When you are ready. My hands were steady. I had worked too many code blues to shake now. The next day, when Daniel and Marlena were out, I plugged the USB drive into my old laptop, the one I had hidden in the lining of my suitcase under a folded sweater. The laptop was a 10-year-old ThinkPad, still running Windows 7, but it was clean and never connected to their Wi-Fi. I used a USB blocker I had bought at a computer repair shop, a small device that prevents any malware from auto-running. I plugged in the drive and opened the folder. There was one file. It was a video recorded on Paul's desktop computer, dated 3 months before he died. Paul's voice came through, quiet and even, the way he sounded when he explained how to reset a circuit breaker or change a tire. He said, "Ellen, if you are listening to this, I am gone, and Daniel has made his move. I suspected it for years. I saw how he looked at your studio, how he borrowed against it, how he resented your name on the account. So I did 3 things. First, I hid the original partnership agreement in the hollow board of the Geneva Bible, a book Daniel would never open because he thinks old Bibles have no value. Second, I filed a copy of that agreement with the county recorder and a notice with the state business registry that no dissolution, sale, or disbursement from the studio over $10,000 would be valid without your in-person, notarized signature, and a passphrase known only to you. Third, I opened a fraud flag with a bank compliance officer at First Meridian Trust, a woman named Ruth Aucaffer. She has the authority to freeze the studio's commercial account and any incoming wire transfers if anyone tries to move money without you. The passphrase is something only you and I know. It is from the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verse 16. Where you go, I will go. Use it. And Ellen, do not sign anything. Save yourself. I listened to the recording twice. Paul had sat at a desk, the same desk where he balanced the checkbook every Sunday, and had recorded this message knowing he might never be able to deliver it. He had not been a dramatic man, but he had built a dead man's switch out of old paper, a bank compliance officer's integrity, and a Bible verse. He had chosen the hollow board of a Bible because he knew I would eventually open it, and because he knew Daniel would throw it away. He had chosen Ruth Aucaffer because she was the compliance officer who had once flagged a small cash deposit Paul had made incorrectly, and he had been impressed by her attention to detail. He had chosen the passphrase from Ruth because he knew I loved that verse, and because he knew Daniel would never think to ask me about it. I did not cry. I had no time for tears, because I had to become the person who could walk into a bank and say no. I called First Meridian Trust from a burner phone I had purchased at a convenience store using cash, a phone I kept hidden inside a hollowed-out paperback in my room, the same paperback I had hollowed using an X-Acto knife and a cutting mat. I asked for Ruth Aucaffer in the compliance department. She answered on the second ring. I gave her my name and the passphrase. She said, "Mrs. Voss, I have been expecting this call. Your husband put a dead man's switch on this account. When Daniel submitted a wire transfer authorization for $740,000 from Wakefield University to an escrow account in Nevis, our system flagged it because your in-person verification was missing. We froze the funds. But Daniel has been calling every day, pressuring us, claiming you are incapacitated, and he has power of attorney. We need the original agreement and evidence of forgery to keep the freeze and refer the case to the FBI. I told her I had both. She asked me to bring the original agreement to the bank branch downtown, but not to let Daniel know. She also confirmed the scale of the fraud. Daniel had used the studio's inventory as collateral for a $200,000 predatory loan from a private lender, had forged my name as guarantor, and was planning to use the Wakefield sale to pay off the loan and pocket the rest. The bank's fraud unit was already building a case. She recruited me to gather final proof, the forged dissolution, the loan agreement, and the USB drive with Paul's video. I agreed. I had been a nurse for 32 years, and I knew how to document a wound. Ruth arranged to meet me at a public library on Thursday afternoon, a place where I could slip away without suspicion. I told Daniel and Marlena I needed to pick up my blood pressure medication and would stop at the library to rest, and Marlena, always eager to keep me docile, nodded and said, "Fine, just do not talk to anyone." I took the bus for the first time in years, carrying a cloth tote with a book I had been slowly reading, and met Ruth in a small study room on the 3rd floor. She was a composed black woman in a navy suit, with a notary seal in her briefcase and a tablet full of bank records. She reviewed my photos, compared the forged signatures to a previous document, and pointed out 5 discrepancies in the notary block, including a stamp number that did not exist in the state database. She said, "The FBI will want the originals, but do not bring them out until I give you the signal. We need you to be present at the bank when Daniel tries to force the signature. I will have agents stationed." She gave me a secure email address and told me to upload the photos from the library's computer after I left. I did, and then I took the bus home, slipping back into the beige guest suite with the locked thermostat and the baby monitor I had unplugged on day 2. I opened the windows for 5 minutes to air out the lavender smell, and I sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about what was coming next. The following Tuesday, I staged a collapse. I had rehearsed it in my mind for days, drawing on every patient I had ever seen go down with a vasovagal syncope or a cardiac event. I waited until Daniel and Marlena were both in the kitchen, arguing about a document from the bank. I stood at the kitchen counter with a glass of water, let my face go slack, dropped the glass, and fell to the floor in a heap. The glass shattered on the tile, and I felt a shard cut my palm, but I did not move. I kept my eyes half open, my breathing shallow, my left arm twisted under me. I moaned, "Daniel, my chest, I can't breathe." Marlena stepped over my legs without looking down. She grabbed the manila folder off the counter and said, "Finally, the bank's release form. We need her signature before Monday." Daniel glanced at me, then at the folder, and said, "Not now, Mom. We will get you to urgent care after we finish this." He stepped over my outstretched hand and walked to the table. Neither of them called 911. Neither of them reached for me. I lay on the cold tile floor, counting my own heartbeat, which was steady, and I watched my son choose a piece of paper over his mother's life. I had my voice recorder running in my pocket, and I knew that moment was on record. His voice, his steps, the indifference. After 4 minutes, I stirred, pushed myself up, and said in a weak voice, "I think I fainted." Daniel said, "You're fine, Mom, just sit down." He did not offer to help me up. I sat on a kitchen chair, bleeding from my palm, and watched them sign their own names on a document they were preparing for me to sign later. That was the point of no return. Any residual family loyalty I felt for Daniel Voss turned to dust. I did not need a jury to tell me who he was. I had seen it with my own eyes and heard it with my own recorder. By Sunday evening, Daniel was unraveling. The bank had told him the wire transfer was frozen pending in-person verification by the account holder, me. Ruth had told him I needed to appear at the downtown branch with 2 forms of ID and sign a release in front of a notary. Daniel did not know Ruth was waiting with a federal agent. He thought he could march me in, hold my elbow, and make me sign. He spent Sunday night pacing the living room, making phone calls to his investment advisor, his lawyer, his accountant, whoever would listen. I sat in the guest room, reading the Geneva Bible by flashlight, the hollow board open on my lap, the original agreement folded inside. I listened to Daniel's voice through the wall, rising and falling, and I thought about Paul, and about how he had seen this coming years ago. He had known his own son, and he had prepared a way out for me. On Monday morning, Daniel told me we were going to a doctor's appointment. Marlena drove. Daniel sat in the back seat next to me, too close, his cologne sharp and his knee bouncing. He said, "Mom, we need to stop at the bank first. Just a quick signature, 5 minutes, and then we will get you checked out. You have been so tired. It is probably anemia." I said nothing. I clutched my purse, which held the original notarized agreement in a zippered compartment, the USB drive in my bra, and the voice recorder running in my cardigan pocket. I had also brought a letter from my doctor, which I had picked up at the urgent care clinic after the collapse, stating that I was in full cognitive health and capable of making my own decisions. I had not told Daniel about that letter. We pulled into the First Meridian Trust parking garage. Daniel walked me through the revolving door with his hand on my upper arm, his fingers pressing in hard enough to bruise. Marlena stayed in the car, checking her lipstick in the mirror and adjusting the rearview mirror to watch the lobby. The bank's interior was all marble and brushed steel, with a line of tellers and a row of private offices behind frosted glass. Ruth Auckhaffer met us at the counter, a composed black woman in a navy suit, with a notary seal on her desk and a stack of forms already arranged. She said, "Mrs. Voss, thank you for coming. We just need your in-person verification for the wire release." Daniel smiled and said, "She is still a little foggy, but she is ready." He slid the release form across the counter. It was a full authorization to release $740,000 to Voss Restoration Trust, a trust I had never agreed to, with a line for my signature at the bottom. Ruth looked at me and said, "Mrs. Voss, do you understand this document?" I said, "Yes, I do." Daniel leaned in and whispered, "Just sign it, Mom. Do it for Dad. He would want you to let me handle things." I put my purse on the counter and unzipped it. I pulled out the original notarized agreement, unfolded it, and laid it next to the release form. The paper was cream-colored and slightly stiff from being inside the hollow board, but the ink was clear, the notary seal raised, and the signatures unmistakable. Then I looked at Daniel and I said, "You wanted my signature. You can have my no." I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I said it the way I used to tell a doctor he was wrong about a dosage, calm and final. Ruth pressed a button under the desk. 2 federal agents and a bank security team stepped from a side door. Daniel's face went white. He tried to grab the release form, but Ruth covered it with her hand. One of the agents said, "Daniel Voss, you are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent." Daniel looked at me, and I saw it then, the exact moment he realized I had never been foggy. He said, "Mom, you can't do this. I'm your son." I said, "I know. That is why it matters." The agent cuffed him and led him away. Another agent went to the parking garage and arrested Marlena, who was still in the driver's seat, her designer handbag on the passenger seat, her phone open to a text message about the wire release. The bank's fraud unit seized the $740,000 in the frozen escrow account and placed a hold on Voss Restoration Trust. The Wakefield University Rare Book Library was notified that the sale was void because the seller lacked standing. The collection never left the studio. I walked out of that bank with the original agreement in my hand and Paul's USB drive still in my bra, and I did not look back. After that morning, Daniel was charged in federal court with wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery, identity theft, and elder abuse. He accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 41 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Marlena pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received 18 months, with 5 years of probation. Their home was seized under asset forfeiture, the Lexus repossessed, the chandelier sold at auction to pay restitution. The predatory lender was investigated and fined for failing to verify the guarantor's identity. Daniel's name was added to the state fraud docket, and his notary public, the one who had stamped the forged dissolution, lost her commission and was charged with notarial misconduct. The forged dissolution was voided by the county recorder, and the original partnership agreement was restored to the public record. The $740,000 from Wakefield University went back to the university because the sale was invalid, but the university was so appalled by the fraud that they offered to pay the studio a $50,000 preservation retainer for future conservation work. I accepted. The $200,000 loan against the inventory was canceled because the collateral could not be encumbered without my consent. The church's Sunday school kept its free Bible repairs, and I extended the promise to the county library system. I also changed the studio's name to Binding of Deceit Rare Books, a name chosen not to shame Daniel, but to tell the truth about what happened inside those walls. As part of Daniel's supervised release, the judge ordered him to complete 2,000 hours of community service in a book conservation program. I requested that he serve those hours at my studio, not out of revenge, but so he could see what honest work looked like. The court agreed, with conditions. Daniel now reports to my shop 3 days a week. He sews book signatures at a long oak bench, wearing a canvas apron that I had printed with the words stitched in lies in black block letters. Every restoration certificate that leaves Binding of Deceit Rare Books includes a line at the bottom. Restoration Assistant Daniel Voss, Federal Fraud Docket Number 24 CF 1183. I do not hide it. I want the record to show that the man who tried to forge his mother out of her life's work is now spending his days stitching paper back together, one honest stitch at a time. He does not speak much, and he avoids my eyes, but he works. That is enough for now. Every morning, I open the shop and set the Geneva Bible on a stand by the front counter, with the hollow board open and the original agreement framed on the wall above it. Paul's warning is still on the last page. Do not trust Daniel. Save yourself. I read it and I think about how he had seen the rot before I did, and how he had built a dead man's switch out of old paper and a bank officer's integrity. He knew I would never open that Bible until I was ready, and he knew Daniel would never open it at all. That was the whole trick. He used their arrogance as a hiding place. Integrity is not inherited. It is stitched one choice at a time, and when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. If this story stuck with you, hit like and subscribe, because I tell stories about family, forgery, and the quiet ways the truth finds a seam. I will see you in the next one.